Warning. Greetings, distinguished guests, and welcome to my YouTube channel. You may recognize this fella here. This is ALASTOR, from the popular Amazon Prime adult cartoon series Has Been a Hotel. He's handmade actually. I made him myself a few years ago, when the only thing that we have going for about that series was a pilot episode that you could watch on YouTube for free. He is the subject of one of my most popular videos, in fact, second only to my angel dust doll. However, it's been quite a long time and I've gotten significantly more experienced in my craft ever since. And so, in response to the overwhelming demand from more Has Been Hotel content from you folks, I've decided it was time to give him a much needed makeover. This project has been in the making for much longer than intended. I guess I did underestimate the task at hand. Needless to say, he really needed it, as you can all see as I am picking him apart. At first I intended to simply give him better clothes and maybe a fresh face up, but yes, he needed much more than just that. I removed all that I could, remembering in the process that those shoes were glued on. Hence why I had to cut the pants open like I did. There was no salvaging them, as the seam lines looked pretty rough and I just can't have that. Then the hair, it had to go. I realized that I'd use a hot glue on those wefts, and that made me ask myself, why did I did that? I would not recommend it, because I think it's much too thick of an adhesive, but that's only my personal opinion, of course. It can be done quite seamlessly. It was indeed a mess, and yes, I did manage to prick my finger with one of the wires that I had to use to anchor those ears and those handlers. Hence why I am wearing a small bandage. Whatever you do, just do not give your blood to ALASTOR. After removing all of that, I brought up a bottle of pure acetone to give him a good power wash. I used it on the body as well, but again, I would not recommend that, as prolonged exposure to the chemical can melt the plastic. It's safe to use on the vinyl head, however. I apologize for the nightmare fuel, but as you can see here, we have some staining and quite a stark contrast between the original vinyl of the head and the clay that I used to sculpt that beautiful smile. If you wonder, I made him using a Monster High Frankie Stein doll head and the body of a Lagoona Blue. It has been modded using Apoxie Sculpt, which is an hair-dry 2-part epoxy putty. I did add a bit more Apoxie Sculpt just here and there to smooth a few imperfections, and I also shaved a tiny bit more on the chest and hips just to make the silhouette a little bit more masculine. Then I gave him a fresh coat of paint just so I can officially start working on him. I went for a dirty beige for his skin tone. As I am here sketching the shape of his eyes using a watercolor pencil and a wet brush, I thought I'd answer a question that I've gotten a lot since the original video came out. Why did I use a female doll to make a male character when we have beautiful Monster High and Ever After High boys? Well, the answer is purely aesthetics. I like the exaggerated proportions of Monster High, especially the girls, and they did fit very well with the style of the show. I've been making a lot of boys like that actually, and I just love it. It's plain and simple, just a choice that I made because I felt like it. There's absolutely nothing deeper than that. After I was happy with the initial sketch, I move on to the face-up proper. I am using watercolor pencils and soft pastels. All brands are listed in the description box. The magic ingredient, however, that makes me able to draw on the face like this is actually the sealant that I use to prime the doll, which is Mr. Super Clear. I also use it to spray a thin coat to save my progress as I work on the face, building pigment and intensity by working in layers. There is a lot of back and forth. I started by laying some base pigments, then I switched to pastels. And for ALASTOR skin tone, I first started some contouring using gray colors just to map out the face. After I was happy with the base, I moved on to some warmer and brighter pigments very gradually, as some of them will have to build up quite a lot. After a few more layers of building color intensity, I started focusing on finer details and a little bit of contrast. At this stage, I also start reaching for my brush. I am using very fine nail hard brushes to get in there and refine, correct, and eventually add tiny details. And then, because artists like me are perfectionists and apparently cannot help themselves, I decided midway through that I would use a small artist knife to shave a tiny bit of the Apoxie Sculpt in there just to refine the shape of the smile. And then I painted over the exposed Apoxie Sculpt as part of the face-up process, just as simple as that. Also, please do not judge my palette. These are the paints I use. It's a mix of watercolors and gouache, and I'm apparently of the mind that every little bit can be of use, so yeah, I haven't had the heart to wipe it clean.
Look at this distinguished gentleman!
And now to make his hair, I will be using, like usual, some acrylic yarn. I start by cutting strands of yarn and then I unravel them all. And instead of going and brushing the fibers or whatever, I start pulling at them to separate the fibers. And I keep on pulling like this until I don't really see clumps anymore. When that's done, all that's left is to flat iron the yarn. And it gives me great results with very decent length and minimal waste. I could absolutely go for much longer hair than I did there, though for ALASTOR it's not gonna be needed. To create wefts out of the yarn that I just prepared, I use my favorite, Mod Podge, to glue the hair on a packaging of any plastic surface that could make them easy to peel off. Before gluing the wefts on the ALASTOR, however, I wanted to make sure I had his ears figured out. So for that I used Warbler thermoplastic and a heat gun to shape them until I was happy. I used then a bit more Warbler just to attach a pin into them so they would be easy to pull on the doll and stay in place. I gave them a coat of paint as a base, and then I covered the ears with some of the yarn that I made for the hair, using again Mod Podge. After that I move on to the hair, and I use Mod Podge once again as my adhesive. I also use pins sometimes just to hold the wefts in place while they dry, while being careful of course not to squish the vinyl of the head too much. Now to make a clean part line, the trick is to glue a nice thick and full weft the wrong way around, and then once it's dry, you fold it back on itself to hide the band of glue. I wasn't perfectly happy with the hairline, so I used my reroute tool to add a few strands of yarn afterwards. It's something I do quite often, but I would not necessarily recommend it, as squishing the head too much could damage the face-up. I finish the hair with more passes of the flat iron, and then I use a gentle boar bristle brush to help smoothing the fibers. It causes a bit of breakage, but honestly it's minimal for the results I get. You can see here the finished locks versus the amount of yarn fluff that I got out of it. I'd say it's pretty good. To give ALASTOR his much needed haircut, I use an eyebrow razor. It's a bit hard to show on camera because of the way I have to hold the head, but it gives a much softer cut than what a blunt scissors cut would do. Then to blend the red and black layers together a little bit more, I use a little bit of very diluted acrylic paint. It should be watered down enough so I can brush out any spot that clumps once the hair dries. Alright, let's get those clothes going now. My initial thought was to undo the clothes that I made for my original doll, and then use them to trace a pattern that I could use for the new set of clothes. However, as you can see, I took a few artistic liberties here and there when I made them back then, and folks, that did complicate things a lot in the long run. And this is where you can see that I indeed have no proper sewing training or experience outside of just weighing things out when I make my dolls. Also, despite me having quite a lot of fabrics in my arsenal now, I still did not have a suitable one that was just the right color for ALASTOR's lighter colored shirt. However, a lot of shades of red could also be argued to be shades of pink, so I started there. I tried to use watered down pigment to help me as well. I am also making this garment with the idea in mind that I will sew it permanently on the doll at the end. I found that making clothes permanent, aside from removable, is giving me room to experiment with things that I would otherwise avoid. I'd rather make my pieces look good and polished on their own. Hence why I am not worried about the piece looking a bit stiff at the moment. I also did not hem the bottom of that piece just yet because I wanted to make sure that the length was right once I had the coat. I could have made a dress shirt with the pink fabric, like a lot of cosplayers do, and I'm sure it would have looked amazing, but I went for a tulle turtleneck instead because, well, this part of the garment, I mean along the neck, it looks significantly darker to me. So that would be the first layer, with the pink shirt going on top of it, and then the coat would finish everything at the end. Before doing the coat, however, I decided to do the pants, and since the shoes were glues/molding on his feet, it was going to be a bit more challenging to do those pants. I put them on, purposely made a bit too big for him, and I pinned the waist so they would rest at the height that I wanted them to be. Then I went to carefully sew the pants on him, going slowly and using a ladder stitch. It looks a bit dangerous on camera, but I was holding him against myself for the most of it, I was a bit awkward to film, so yeah. It did not bump on the desk though, still a worrying sight, but don't worry. I used a ladder stitch to tighten the waistband as well. Okay, now the big one. I'm not gonna lie, I had to do that coat 3 times. First one was done following the pattern traced from the old coat, and there was many details that simply did not do it because years ago I did not have as much experience as I do today making these clothes. As for the second one, it was flawed, but I ruined all chances of making it work by cutting too much fabric out of it by accident. So here came the third one. I made a few extra M's invisibly sewn inside here and there just to make sure it laid on the waist the way I wanted it to. As for the vertical lines, they are carefully painted by hand, slowly holding my breath. I think using tape would have been an idea, but I digress. I also used watered down acrylics to help me with the color of that pink fabric that I use for the accent, but also to add a bit of texture to the coat because at the bottom it does look a bit distressed and worn down, despite ALASTOR looking wholesome, dandy and well put together. I reassure you though, these look intense right now because it is wet, but it's significantly toned down once dry. I started putting him together, and before I added the coat permanently, I glued some black ribbon for the cross that he has on his chest. I glued it with fabric glue, and I made a pretty big mistake at this point as I glued the ribbon to go all the way down, but that's not a thing on this design. For the front of the coat, similarly to how I did it in the past, I cut a single piece of faux leather and painted it to match. I then used some foam triangles that I planned to use to stuff the shoulders of the coat. I made a hole inside of them so I could pass the arms through just to make sure that it would not move once in place. I took some time to line everything up just the way I wanted it to be, to pin everything just right in place so I could prepare to sew the coat permanently on the doll once everything was to my liking. For the bow tie, I used some black ribbon. To try to improve the shoes, I first sandwiched the man into a clean towel to protect him from my devilish tools. I then used my heat gun to try to reheat and shape the warbler that I used just a bit better. I also added new soles and, well, I didn't do it on camera, but I also had to sand off some of the paint just in an attempt to smooth the texture a little bit. Once I was done, he got a fresh coat of paint on these shoes. I also gave his hands a fresh coat of paint as well, electing not to mud them and instead keeping them on the simple side. For his little antlers now, I made a crude shape first, using a bit of metallic wire on a pin, and then I elected to cover them in polymer clay. I did this process in 3 steps, and I baked the pieces in between just so I could see the progress and sand each step accordingly just to make sure it looked smoother. While that was happening, I also did his monocle, and I used another pin and the same metal wire. Before covering the monocle arm in polymer clay as well though, I decided to add a tiny drop of super glue just to make sure that the pin was well attached and wouldn't move. Once done with the baking and the sanding, all these tiny pieces need now is a coat of paint and some protective varnish. Of course, I also added a lens to the monocle. It was cut from dull plastic packaging and secured with a tiny amount of superglue. Then I moved on to crafting his lovely microphone. I made it on a wooden dowel and I fashioned it using warbler and my heat gun. I had some craft foam on hand too just in case, but I ended up using it just to get an idea of the shape that I wanted, size and dimensions. One paint job after, and this is the finished result. And my girlfriend thought it looks like the Eye of Sauron, so if you needed another confirmation that this man is up to no good, well, you're welcome. I know I have a very bad sense of humor, and no, you don't have to let me know. A lot of detail polishing later, because I can't help myself really. This is our man. And honestly, I think he's pretty close to completion now. Though I wanted him to have a little something special. And happens that I have some clear doll stand on hand, and I thought maybe I could make him something worthy of an overlord. It's not perfect because I freehanded it mostly, but it looks great to me, I mean. I like it. Do you? you have it, distinguished guests. I hope you enjoyed the ride. It was definitely something, I'm telling you. I really had wanted originally to release that video in June, but, well, life happened. As for making more dolls from Has-Been Hotel or I Love a Bus, I am not going to make any promises, but I hear you all loud and clear. Redoing Stylus is very tempting, as well as making Lucifer, so who knows. As for this devilish gentleman here, well, this time around I've decided that I was not going to keep him. He's not perfect by any means, but I'll be fine sending him away. He's going to go up for sale on my Ko-fi as soon as I can put him up. The link to that will be in the description box below. And like usual, if there is anything, please sign off in the comments below, let me know what you think. I'll reply to as many comments as I can. But in the meantime though, most important, please stay safe.